The House Intelligence Committee voted to release the Democratic memo to the public. That memo is now sitting on President Trump's desk, awaiting his stamp of approval to declassify the information so we can read it. Meanwhile, Democrats are starting to go on record defending the government's abuse of power detailed in the Nunes memo, mostly because they don't like Trump, I assume. And I think that's what we call Trump derangement syndrome, and this is about stage 5. We learned in the Nunes memo about an incredible violation of the rights of private citizens by our government. But because it reflects badly on Democrats in power who did this, Democrats don't seem to care. Let me ask you if you care about the abuses detailed in the Nunes memo. This is what we learned. According to the Nunes memo, the Christopher Steele dossier was used as justification for the FISA court warrant to spy on Trump campaign official Carter Page. Not once, but 4 separate times. This is a problem because the FBI didn't even verify the contents of the dossier before they used it as a reason to spy on Page. Basically, they didn't care if it was true. They just wanted to spy on Trump's campaign because they hated Donald Trump. And make no mistake, this unverified dossier was the main reason they obtained these warrants. Former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe testified, according to the Nunes memo, that without the dossier, the Department of Justice wouldn't have even sought these warrants. That means, despite Democrats blustering, the dossier was the impetus for this whole witch hunt. By the way, this is where the corruption continues to pile on. Top FBI officials knew all about this. They knew the memo was garbage, they knew it was unverified, and they knew it was the primary reason the warrants were sought. We know the top FBI officials knew this because FBI Director James Comey signed off on 3 of these warrants to spy on Page. Yet guess who wasn't told about the false and biased nature of the dossier? That's right, the FISA court judge who granted the warrant was not told during the process that the Christopher Steele dossier was paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC, or that the FBI hadn't verified these claims, or the fact that Christopher Steele was, and I quote here, passionate about Donald Trump not being president. This is a clear case of government abusing their surveillance power to spy on a private citizen to try to destroy a presidential candidate because they don't like him. That should scare us all, no matter what political party we like to vote for. Nevertheless, liberals have spent the past 72 hours trying to discredit the Nunes memo, claiming their Democratic version of the memo rebuts the allegations contained in the original one. Joining me now to clarify, Republican Congressman from Florida's 1st District, Congressman Matt Gaetz. Congressman, thanks for joining me, sir.
Good to be back on the tipping point, Liz.
All right, Congressman, let me ask you, first of all, the Democratic memo that the House Intelligence Committee voted to release to the public, as I said, President Trump needs to give it his stamp of approval. Have you read this Democratic version?
I have, Liz, and I fully support its release. I think there's an important challenge that the Intelligence Committee has dealt with, and that's the challenge of partisanship, and it's come exclusively from Democrats on the issue of transparency. Republicans voted to release the Republican memo and the Democrat memo. Democrats voted to release their memo, but they voted against releasing Chairman Nunes' memo that was prepared by his staff. So we want the American people to see all the evidence, to make their own decisions, and just as you outlined in your monologue, there are real needs for bipartisan reform here. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, we don't want to live in a country where cash at a political party is convertible into a government-sponsored wiretap to spy on your opposition. That's not good for anyone.
No, it's not. It is funny how Democrats, who always claim to be the party of transparency, they were the ones who voted not to release the Republican version and only to release their version. Sir, I know you can't betray classified information on this show as much as I would like you to, but you can talk about the implications of the information contained in these memos. Just as you said after you viewed the Nunes memo, you said the information in this memo should cause people to go to jail. Can you tell us if the information contained in the Democratic version, does that materially change any of the allegations of abuse in the Nunes memo?
Well, absolutely not. The Democrat memo is written more like a press release than an intelligence document, and it makes a series of mischaracterizations of fact and of law that I think will be very easy to rebut once it is into the public square. I also think it's important to recognize the fact that we've got verifiable issues here that can be determined. So it's not as if these are questions of conjecture or editorial analysis. the facts laid out in the Nunes memo will withstand scrutiny, and the claims in Mr. Schiff's memo will not. I'm very confident in that. I'm willing to have both documents in the public space so that we can discuss them and debate them. And ultimately, we need bipartisan reforms so that this never happens again.
Right, because at the end of the day, we shouldn't be coming at this from a Democratic point of view or a Republican point of view. We should be coming at this from the point of view of Americans who do have a fundamental discord with their government, who do not want their government to be more powerful than the individual citizen here. Let me ask you, so the Nunes memo, though, was based off of these applications, the FISA applications. That's where some of the partisan bickering is stemming from. Democrats are saying that Nunes mischaracterized these applications. Do you believe that we need to release those FISA applications in perhaps redacted form, but release them so the American people can judge for ourselves which memo accurately characterizes the abuses?
I do, Liz. I think it's appropriate, as you mentioned, to redact sources and methods, but I'm for getting as much information into the public as possible. I think that transparency is the best antidote to corruption and to bad illegal acts like those we've seen at the high levels of the FBI and Department of Justice. And so I have also joined today my colleague Louis Gohmert in calling for the release of the transcripts of the FISA hearings. So not just the actual application, but what prosecutors told FISA court judges as they were seeking this wiretap information. And what I'm most troubled by, Liz, is that after the FBI learned that Christopher Steele was no longer credible, after they essentially fired him, they continued to renew FISA warrants, never telling the judge that they deemed him uncredible. That is a material misrepresentation of fact. It may very well be perjury, and it requires our most serious attention and investigation.
Right, and as Cheryl Atkinson pointed out, I think almost without question it violates the Woods procedures, which is an FBI code of ethics that states that you will not misrepresent something in an effort to obtain a warrant, which clearly is what happened in this case. In my opinion, further investigation here is warranted into their behavior. Do you believe, given the information that we know or that we are about to find out once the president releases the Democratic version of this memo, the Schiff memo, do you believe any criminal charges should be filed, and if so, against whom?
Well, it's a great point. I believe laws were broken, and I also don't believe that the Department of Justice and the FBI can investigate themselves. And that's why I've joined with a number of Republicans in calling for a second special counsel to assess the abuses of this FISA system and determine whether or not people need to go to jail as a consequence of the representations and misrepresentations that they made to the courts. We're going to learn more when we see transcripts about precisely which individuals may be facing criminal culpability, but you may be looking at some of the most senior officials at Justice and at the FBI, and so clearly we cannot have a U.S. attorney handling this case. We cannot have the Justice Department handling this case. We need to find someone who is not a swamp creature. We need to go out into America, find a retired federal judge who can look at these facts and determine who needs to be prosecuted, because laws were broken and it should never happen again.
No, it shouldn't. And speaking of swamp creatures here, I do want to get your reaction to your own colleague, Congressman Schiff, who voted not to release this to the American public. He stated publicly that his reason for voting against the release of the Nunes memo is because it would cause political divide in our nation. That never has seemed to bother Democrats before in the past. So I don't believe that that is the real reason. But how do you react to a colleague of yours in the U.S. House of Representatives trying to hide from the American people abuse of government inflicted on a private citizen?
Well, transparency should be a bipartisan issue, and unfortunately, under Adam Schiff's leadership, Democrats in the Intelligence Committee have chosen to be partisan about transparency rather than working together. I don't know how Adam Schiff has any credibility left with the American people. He said the release of the Nunes memo would detail sources and methods and would be a horrible thing for the intelligence community. Well, that obviously turned out to be a lie. And then he said, oh, we can't release the memo because there have been material changes. Democrats don't even bother making that argument anymore. And so time and again, Adam Schiff has been proven to lack credibility with the American people. I think Chairman Nunes has done a fantastic job, and I think that his memo will withstand factual scrutiny, and Mr. Schiff's memo will not.
Do you believe that Congressman Schiff should step down, at least from his position on the House Intelligence Committee, given his actions?
look, I don't get into what members of Congress should or should not step down. I leave that to others. I just think he should start telling the truth. And I think he should stop trying to stand in the way of the American people finding out what really happened. Remember when Democrats thought Russia was going to be this big, great issue for them and it was going to help them to hurt Donald Trump and hurt Republicans? The reality is just the opposite. We want transparency. We want the truth. We know that President Trump did not collude with the Russians in this election. And now it's the Democrats trying to hide Hillary Clinton's bad actions and the bad actions of the people who wanted to see Hillary Clinton become president. And I think that that's becoming very clear to the public. And hopefully we'll be able to work together to institute reforms so that no matter which party is in power, this never happens again. Liz, we know that there are going to be times where Republicans and Democrats are in power. And under either scenario, the American people's constitutional rights must be protected. That's what Republicans are fighting for today.
Right, and it should be something that the American people think about, I think, that when we're talking about collusion, we have no evidence, like you said, that Donald Trump colluded in any way with the Russians. We do have evidence that high-ranking officials in our intelligence communities colluded with our government colluded with Hillary Clinton even, to target their political opponent. And that's horrifying because our rights, the violation of our rights is on the line here. Congressman Gaetz, thank you so much for coming on the show, sir. It was great to see you.
Thank you, Liz.